Good evening, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We're going to give folks a moment to sign on. If you would like to listen to this presentation in Spanish, you can click the globe-shaped icon down at the bottom of your screen and choose Spanish.
Muy buenas tardes. En breve vamos a empezar. Vamos a darle la oportunidad a las demás personas a que se unan a la llamada y si desean escuchar la interpretación de esta presentación en español, pueden presionar el icono que parece un globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de la pantalla.
Hello to those of you just signing on. We'll get started in a few minutes. If you would like to listen to this broadcast in Spanish, you can click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and press Spanish. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the digital dialogue series, Co-Learning to Build a Good Food System. My name is Molly Reardon. We do have Spanish interpretation available this evening. We're having a slight technical difficulty with it, but our interpreter will be on momentarily and we'll let you know in the chat. And we might pause to give folks a chance to move to the Spanish interpretation if they'd like. My name is Molly Reverend. I'm the Good Food Purchasing Coordinator for the City of Philadelphia at the Department of Public Health in the Division of Chronic Disease and Injury Prevention. If you've participated in these digital dialogues before, you've heard me say that in my division, we believe that all people should live to their fullest potential in environments that allow them to grow and thrive. That progress only happens when we treat all people with dignity, care, and respect, and that we acknowledge that dismantling systems of oppression is foundational to achieving our vision of a just food system. Tonight, here in Philadelphia, it bears repeating that last point. If we want to go anywhere, we must first work on dismantling systems of oppression, specifically systemic and institutionalized racism. Yesterday in our city, Walter Wallace Jr., a 27-year-old Philadelphia man who was Black, was shot and killed by 2 white Philadelphia police officers. Philadelphia mourns his loss and mourns the culture of racial prejudice, hatred, and violence that precipitated his death, and so many deaths of men and women like him. Violence against Black people and Black bodies matters. Justice for Black and brown people matters. Walter Wallace's life matters. Black lives matter. And that has been a message that has permeated these digital dialogues, and it's particularly relevant to the conversation this evening. This is going to be a little bit of a different conversation, and I'd like to share the mic with my co-curator, Susanna Erminska, who is a curator at the Division of Cultural and Civic Engagement at the Free Library of Philadelphia. And Susanna is going to share some words and ground us for this different type of conversation we're going to be having this evening.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you to our presenters for joining tonight and giving their time and expertise to talk about their work and how it connects to our lives. I just wanted to reiterate what Molly said, that our work affirms that Black Lives Matter, and that when I think about myself as a mother and I think about Walter Wallace's mother last night and what she was going through, I don't want that for anyone. And so I hope that every decision that we make works towards a world where that doesn't happen anymore. And for tonight, I wanted to share an approach to a community agreement that I think will allow us to kind of think through how we talk about everything tonight. And I was able to pull from a lot of really wonderful resources, including Aorta, which is based here in Philadelphia. And Molly, when you're ready, if you could share the slide. So this is an opportunity to kind of think about how every one of us, from each of you who is attending tonight to each of our presenters, we're all shaping this space together. And these agreements are ones that we can come to tonight to try to make this conversation really one that we can feel proud of and one that is inclusive. And there's also an opportunity to add your own contributions to this list and allow it to grow. And so when I have a chance to go through some of these points, then if you'd like to, you can add additional comments in the chat. So one mic, really the idea that when we have a person that's speaking, we should really give them the floor and allow them to be the primary ones that are being heard. Move up, meaning if you haven't had a chance to speak or you don't often speak, maybe see if this is an opportunity for you to share, and also move up by listening. If this is a time for you to be listening, then please move up in doing so. Find a growing edge and move with it. The idea just being that I hope, are always looking for opportunities for lifelong learning. And when we find a space to grow, we want to move with that growth and really embrace that opportunity. Process over product, the idea being that, you know, it doesn't matter how many people are here with us tonight, or, you know, sort of like what the end product is, as much as there's a real emphasis on being able to go through this process of going through this program together and really being present. Recognizing impact over intent, the idea being that even if you don't intend to say or do something hurtful, you might still have an impact that is negative, and that you want to really recognize that when that occurs. Naming harm, Molly and I really want to be here in this space to kind of help bring us along in this conversation and name harm if it occurs. And also for attendees, it's an opportunity, if you say something that feels harmful to someone, to acknowledge it. We can't always be articulate. That's definitely one that I like, where, you know, I stumble over my words, but I appreciate when we can really hear each other, even if we're not using the exact right words, or if we, you know, have an accent or whatever it might be. Approach with generous curiosity, the idea being that, you know, this is really an opportunity to listen and engage with one another. And so to have an openness around being interested can really be beneficial. Listen for understanding, not response. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but again, the idea just being that when we're trying to understand and not immediately respond, then we can end up having a much better interaction. And then finally, and definitely not last, honor and affirm lived experiences. So we're each coming to the table here today, the proverbial table, with our own lived experiences. And we really want to honor those lived experiences as a very important type of expertise. And with that, I'd like to encourage you all to do two things in the chat. Please go ahead and add additional comments that you think might be good in terms of a community agreement for this event. And then also share with us where you're coming from, how you came here, a little bit about yourself, so that as we're going through this evening, we kind of know who's in the space together. Thank you.
Thanks, Susanna. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, but I'm happy to bring these up at any time. And I think that if you are introducing yourself, and we really encourage you to do so in the chat, there's an option to write to all panelists and attendees. That way we can all be speaking to each other that way. Without further ado, I would love to introduce and thank our two speakers this evening, Rebekah Williams, community organizer, good food advocate, and founder of Food for the Spirit, sometimes based in Buffalo, New York, sometimes based in the Finger Lakes region, and Chris Bolden Newsome, co-director of Sankofa Community Farm at Bartram's Garden here in Philadelphia. I'd like them to introduce themselves in their own words in a second. Thank you both for being here. And I just wanted to remind us that we're here to, and I'm going to read the description of the talk that we thought that we were having tonight, and acknowledge that we might not be having quite this talk, but we think we might be having something along the lines of it. The description is, the work of Black leaders and community food systems movements are often under-resourced and overlooked by funders and large white-led agricultural institutions. This conversation digs deep into what Black-led movement for healthy, sustainable, equitably produced food means for our food system and how that vision can be supported. So, Becca, welcome. Chris, welcome. Becca, I think I'll start with you, our out-of-town guest, so to speak, and ask you if you'd be willing to share more about your work and the journey that brought you to your work, and anything else that's coming up for you this evening.
Well, thanks for having me, Molly and Susanna, and so excited to be here with Chris and with all of the attendees tonight. I was taking a peek at some of the names and so grateful to hear that some of my Buffalo family and Finger Lakes family are in attendance. So, so grateful to all of you who could make it. My name is Rebekah Williams. I also go by Becca, and my story about, well, just very quickly who I am. I do wear a couple different hats these days. Molly and I met each other through our work with the Good Food Purchasing Program. And through that work, I'm a coalition coordinator for the Good Food Buffalo Coalition in Buffalo, New York. And I do that work under the guise of an organization, urban agriculture organization in Buffalo called Massachusetts Avenue Project. But I'm here tonight under the context of the work that we are doing with Food for the Spirit. And I see members of Food for the Spirit's Buffalo Food Equity Network on the call tonight. Just so glad that you all are here. And the work of Food for the Spirit, the mission of Food for the Spirit is racial healing towards ecological justice and equitable food systems. And that work is, we strive to fulfill that mission through using the arts and creative facilitation to encourage dialogue around those things, but also to engage in the world in real ways around those aspects. So I think that's good enough for now.
Thanks, Becca. And Chris, do you want to introduce yourself and your work and what brings you and how you're feeling tonight? Oh, I think that you're still on mute.
Sorry.
It's all
Okay,
right.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Sometimes the earphones confuse me. All right. Well, first of all, giving honor to my creator and to our creator and then to all of the ancestors on whose shoulders we stand this night, particularly the ancestors of Brother Walter and his mother. May he rest in power and in peace. I'm Chris Bolden, and I want to thank, first of all, Susanna and Molly for extending this invitation. And I'm so excited to be working with my sister Rebekah. It feels like this is just a wonderful sort of come to the events to get us together and start building and rapping together, and that feels really, really powerful. We've been in spaces together before, but I'm really, really happy that it's been an honor to be on this panel with you and to share some ideas and thoughts. So I'm Chris Bolden, the son of Rufus and Melda, and one of them at least, I believe, is on this call. And they are farmer folks, food sovereignty activists, mama, daddy, grandmama, and granddaddy in Greenville, Mississippi, where I am originally from and where they are originally from. So I hail from the Mississippi Delta, and that is important in terms of talking about the work that I do, because I as you said earlier, I'm one of the co-directors at Sankofa Community Farm, where I work along. Can everyone hear me well? Okay, all right. Where I work alongside a wonderful and gifted staff, including my co-director, Tyler Holmberg, farm manager, LaQuanda Dobson, and Ashley Griffith, our new farm assistant. And also the beautiful community of people that we are sort of ensconced in and connected to through arteries of love and service. We do this work in Southwest Philadelphia. So of course, the issue with Brother Walter's murder was very heavy and was in the air. I actually didn't know about it until I got to work this morning. So still sort of letting it settle in. We do work at Sankofa Community Farm at the intersection of spirit, culture, land, and community. And that happens on the space of Bartram's Garden, which is a historic botanical garden located here in Philadelphia. It's Philadelphia, so everything in Philadelphia is first. We have the appellation first, right? So it's the first botanical garden in North America, is how they say it. But we do work nevertheless on that land in a very unique partnership with this institution, with this entity, which is the former home and still celebrated space of a colonial family, one of the colonial founding for the families in this area. So that is powerful. I think it's significant in itself that we are doing work specifically geared towards liberation, the uplift of Black people, the descendants of the enslaved Africans who at one time worked that very land and lived in that very neighborhood. And so we do this work largely focusing on an intergenerational approach. We have a 60-bed community garden that helps to bring in people from the neighborhood who otherwise, would be difficult to contact. We have programs in which we actually go out and build beds under our Build a Bed program by Ty in the neighborhood for people who are wanting to reconnect. So the work that we do is very specifically geared towards the African diaspora. This is all Black people, sons and daughters of Africa scattered throughout the world, wherever we are, whatever we look like, wherever we actually physically come from. We do the work of lifting up sort of the healing power, of the wisdom located within those cultures. And we believe it's very powerful. We believe it's also very pertinent and necessary, particularly at this time in the life of Black people in America. And so we want to lift that and pull out things that were positive, perhaps have been forgotten, left to the side. People come to Philadelphia, largely the African American community is largely immigrated from the Deep South just 2, 3, and 4 generations ago, not super long ago. So the wonderful thing about Philadelphia is most people can trace their roots back to a particular part of the South, which is our, we've maintained origin point in the Americas. That's as close as we can think of as home. And so we do the work of lifting up the foods of those cultures people have forgotten or no longer use or are difficult to find here. We grow crab peas, we grow purple hull peas, we grow all of the different sweet potatoes. We have a variety of greens that were eaten by Black people, particularly in the Deep South and now all over the world still, in order to help people reconnect to the culture. And I wrap up by saying why this is so important, and of course it's not the only tool we use to connect with our community, but this is so important because as people, we do not have or do not tend to have, because we've been moved around so often, so many times, for so many reasons. We do not tend to have photographs or sometimes even, mementos of almost any kind sometimes for our ancestors, even very recent ancestors sometimes. We survived and endured the crack epidemic, which took out whole generations of people. And for the folks who survived, there was great attrition and loss of personal and family history. And so we are under the belief, and it has proved successful so far, that when you can enact the ritual movements of your family, that your family might have done, then that is the way of reconnecting with them and pulling in that picture. When you can eat the foods that great grandmother ate, then we can actually make that reconnection. I hope people can hear me better. It seems to be some difficulty with microphones. But that's the work that we do in Sankofa, and we're blessed to do it. I mean, we of course use the phrase Sankofa, which comes from the Akan phrase, right, which is part of a larger sort of phrase, which we translate into Black English as, we say in Akan, say, well, where final Sankofa Yankee, there ain't nothing wrong with going back and fetching what you left behind. Because we need that permission sometimes, particularly in a country that has ignored, erased, or obliterated our history, and sometimes in the ways that we cooperated in that in order to allay our own trauma. So we hold up that phrase as our model and our guide. We will reach back as we move forward to bring what we need into the present. And so that's what we do.
Chris, thank you. And your sound is perfect now. I didn't want to interrupt your flow to try to figure out what your static was, but you're ace now. So thank you. I'm so thrilled that you're both here and thinking about this idea of, what we said in the description, right? Black-led movements for healthy, sustainable, equitably produced food. it's so much more than that. Chris, you're speaking of and drawing on ancestors tonight, and drawing on ancestors always. And I think that there's so much of when we're talking about food movements that we're not encapsulating when we're speaking of them. But I'm wondering if you could kind of give your thoughts on this idea that as leaders of community food movements, I'm going to just categorize you that way, but you can categorize yourself in other ways. Thinking about the racial dichotomy that exists, and that Black-led food movements are often under-resourced, are not seen as easily fundable or whatever it is, as like white institutions. And I just wanted to know if that resonates with any of your experience. This question is for either of you. If you could give other reactions to that description about what it takes to appropriately resource Black leaders in food work.
Yeah. Well, that is a juicy question.
Right. We're just starting off with an easy one.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate that. Boy, what to say? I mean, I think where to begin with that. I think so. There are several ideas in that. Again, please at any point, Sister Rebekah, jump in. As you catch the wind, for this. I think there are a lot of ideas, a lot of elements wrapped up in that question. My focus and our focus at Sankofa Farm is first and foremost on African people, and what we need, and how to go about getting what we need, and of course we lead with food sovereignty. So for us, food sovereignty is a step up from food justice, right? I mean, food sovereignty is the idea that people have the right, and I don't even say obligation, honestly, to make informed decisions about and participate in where their food comes from and how they get it, and that extends also to the other important aspects of community life. But it is that those people. So for me, that's where I started. So when speaking to that idea, that question, I think the first part, it leaves me with some questions. The first part is that the good food movement. I think just thinking about that, and what the original question was that what is often come to be defined, so much of it is still defined largely within the context of, I think, a larger white-led power structure. And so I think that even when we talk about, what does it mean to be the good food movement? What is how are white activists, who are doing good, trying to do good in communities of color, receive more attention, all of that. I think that the idea for us is still largely that Black people have to be at the center of it. I know that sounds simple and maybe even redundant. I think that what that ends up meaning for us is that we have to have the information that we need in order to do that. We have to be properly informed. I don't think for me, less of a question of resources in terms of material resources, even cash resources. I think we need to go to that first, though that's absolutely important and essential. Let me not back up from that. I'm not living in a fantasy world that we can sort of pull the material things that we need out of the air or by simple faith alone. I don't believe that. But for me, again, I have to reach back. I'm inspired by, and my heroes in this work are people like Mama Fannie Lou Hamer, and all the people, involved, in the Black-led Southern cooperative movements, in the South that were largely agricultural, but was not always exclusively. And I think that, again, what we saw in those situations were people pooling the resources they had and people being willing, as our people, to put ourselves first in such a way that we are calling the shots about that we are going to. So for me, I mean, I guess the question, and I don't know that you specifically asked that, but it sort of leads into it, is the role of white people in some ways, or white activism, you know, in good food movements, you know.
Brother Chris.
Yeah.
If I may.
Yes.
When you kicked off, and boy, was I listening intensely. There was a little bit of static, but appreciating. No, I mean earlier when you were introducing yourself, I was just appreciating your honoring the ancestors, and I am new to this work in terms of I'm only starting in on food systems work in 2012, like formally as a professional. And then it was in 2018 when I really found the important connection between race and food systems work, race and racism, and the real work behind the issues to addressing these issues in our communities. And I think the way that you kicked us off in talking about acknowledging our ancestors was a reminder to me that that is really what this is about. And before we started, before everybody else jumped on the call, I actually stepped away for a moment, and I didn't tell you all we were on the call at 5:15 early, and I snuck away for a quick second. And it was because I went to get a picture that my sister recently got for me. And this was critical for me. So this is, I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
This is my great-grandfather. On the back of this picture, and if you can see it, maybe I can shine the light on it a little better.
Yeah, and drop it down a little bit. We can see his head.
So this is great-grandpop James Henry Williams. And the back of the picture said, Pop in his victory garden. So 1930s, right? And of course, I never met this wonderful, beautiful human. I have another picture of him and his children and his grandchild, which is my father, Dr. Scott Williams, on my wall. And I look at it frequently. And for me, this picture is symbolic also of this work that I'm doing now, that, you know, really trying to seek out my heritage and my ancestry and understanding my Blackness, and also the relationship of this food work and my commitment to environmentalism as a Black woman. I needed to go back, like you talk about with Sankofa, I needed to go back and find my own personal intersection with this work. Where did my people come from? Where did my dad's family come from? My dad didn't really tell us those stories growing up. So I had to go and try and find them, right? And my sister's been on this journey with me too, hence this picture she just gave me for my birthday this year. And I didn't know that my grandfather was a gardener. My dad never told me. So I didn't know that I had food growers in my somewhat recent ancestry. And so what's important for me sharing this and lifting this up in our conversation is going back to some of the things that we have touched on in our one-on-one conversations leading up to this, that, you know, that the way we do things in our organizations, when our organizations or when our movements are led by Black people, when they're led by I'm thinking of my Kashmiri friend, Dr. Raja, or when they're led by people, you know, of different diversities, not Eurocentric, not white ancestry, it looks, I hope that all the messages we're getting about language interpretation is okay. I'll just want to acknowledge that I'm noticing that and hoping that we're all set with that. But yeah, I just wanted to say that when our movements are led and started by Black people, that we really have we have the reins and we know what we need, and we can come together and find the way that we need to do it together to do the healing work that I think you were also talking about, that I wasn't able to capture everything you were saying, but I know that that is something that we resonate around as well. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that for me is that what you're saying is really key. I mean, somebody in the chat also mentioned about my shrine. I'm doing this right in front of my ancestral shrine. And so, you know, which is where my partner and I do our daily prayers and make offerings and that sort of thing. And we keep it as a reminder. And up above, you see, this is Fannie Lou Hamer dressed up. I think that I constantly go back to this notion of my ancestors. We're not standing alone in the work that we do. I think what's vitally important for Black people, and I'm gonna speak specifically, you know, for my people, for our people in terms of what I can say, is that we are historically and almost universally a spiritual people. I'm not going to shy away from saying that. I think that has a meaning in lots of different ways for different people, but essentially that is, and so that for me is the root and the foundation in terms of that. And that I think is where the basis of, in terms of our ancestors, what they had, what their spirituality allowed. Oh, can y'all hear me? What they had and what their spirituality allowed them to carry that on to other generations is a deep sense of love, you know. And I think that what it looks like practically is that we as a community, and I'm thinking about what happens at Sankofa Farm and some of our partners. We actually love, you have to love the community that you're with. And there are practices we do that help to strengthen and remind us constantly of that love. You know, when we eat together with our community, we have a wonderful youth program, but we don't just talk to elders, people older than us and ourselves and our peers, you know, involving young people because they need to know this. Many of them were blown away to hear, because we also have a program called the New Freedom School, modeled on Fannie Lou Hamer's Freedom School, which he started in the 60s in Mississippi when they realized that the adequate education was not coming to the Black kids of Mississippi. And so Black people got together. They didn't ask for money and they did not wait on a grant. I want to say that. And they did not wait on specific support from white people. Right. For me, that's absolutely key. That's what I've been trying to build up to. I don't know why you say. They were not waiting on someone else to take care of what they other needs to solve before they had the means to alleviate. Now, did they take help? Did they receive help from outside? Absolutely. They did when it was necessary, but I think that there was a strategic understanding of that. And so I'm really inspired by that. At our farm, we work very specifically, around this issue. Again, we're lifting up the Black experience. Our first obligation is to go to where that need is. So when the young people need to have their story told, we give them a forum to do that. You know, when the young people need to hear parts of their stories that they were never told, because there's so much trauma. Well, we're not understanding what we're seeing happen now, you know, in the streets and in our neighborhoods. A lot of this trauma. And science talks about epigenetics and how the effects of trauma can be passed on. That's what we are called to alleviate and to do that, you know, through working with people. So I think that for us, we don't separate or categorize, you know, I think the aspects of this work into sort of different spaces so much that we recognize all this one whole. And so when we're teaching cooking, we're also, talking about agriculture and we're talking about history, and all of that. So when we have white people with us in leadership, it's really important for us that they take their attention kind of off of whiteness as well. We have white people. Again, we have a unique situation in our farm. We are co-led. We have two leaders because the way it was originally set up, it was not really a script. We were originally a UPN program. And there wasn't quite a script for how we manage ourselves in our work. And this is America. So even though, I'm about 6 years or plus the singer, my co-worker, my homework with whom I started this work, because there was no plan. Oh, are you able to hear me? No.
You're a little staticky again.
Oh,
It's
no.
kind of fading in and out.
Oh, okay.
Wait, now you sound good though.
I don't know what's happening. You know, I also see
sometimes it's clear, and then sometimes it's.
I apologize for this. I don't know why. I'm trying not to move. You know what I do see? I see myself twice on the screen.
Right.
So I see myself talking, and then there's another screen that has
And
my
there's
name.
another one with your name. I think that actually might be a misnomer, and it might be on the back end. Our Spanish interpreter might be accidentally renamed as you also. So I think that you're okay on that piece.
Bueno, entonces yo me llamo Rosa.
See, and so you know, for our attendees, we're just going to do a little bit of live facilitation here. Chris, if you're having, right now you're fine, and if we start to lose you again, I can put in the chat for you a phone number you can call if you want to do it by phone, and then maybe
I can do that.
Okay, I'm gonna put it in here. Just in 1 second. And thank you to our participants for acknowledging and working with us in this digital world that we're all living in.
Thank you. And I'm really one of the least equipped for the digital. I will say this is what I'm working with, so I hope that this can connect.
Oh, no, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Sorry. So I'm going to put it in here again because it did not do what I wanted it to do. Hey. I love that you're on flip phone. And it's got a passcode.
Okay. All right.
Do you see it in the chat that 301 is the?
I do indeed.
And then, Chris, you will just have to mute yourself on the video and mute your computer so that your sound will go in and out of your phone only. Otherwise, there'll be an echo.
Okay, so mute myself on the computer.
Mute yourself on the computer so we can still see your face. We still want to see your face, but also mute your computer so no audio comes out of your computer. You'll want it all to come out of your phone.
Okay, I see. Okay. All right. Oh, okay. Let me do the muting first.
Okay.
So
Chris is muted, and Becca, I wanted to pass to you to see if you want to share or if you would like to hold before we resume.
I think I already addressed your question that you had posed about the you were asking us about the language around kind of this presentation, and I had shared about the importance of our community defining how this work looks, and that's why Black leadership is essential in our movements.
Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if I can ask you a little bit about something I heard you say, and this is a part of leadership, is process, and how the process at the core of the work of uplifting and establishing Black leadership in food systems work. And when you're thinking about the process of your work, not just the end goal, but like how you go about your work, I wonder if you can share a little bit about what you've learned about process from Food for the Spirit and your ventures there.
Yeah. Well, I think what's key is that the process is never going to look the same anytime you go through it. And I think what's also key is the people and a focus on the people. And just acknowledging again that there's some people in the chat that work with me through Food for the Spirit. And when I talk about the work that we do in Food for the Spirit, I say that I'm a co-founder of Food for the Spirit. And it's because of that process piece that, you know, this idea of the hero, the superhero with the cape, the one man who comes in and saves the day, that's a very white, capitalist, white supremacist kind of focus, and really, you know, this idea of process and humanizing the process and having the people be the focus of the process is what we're talking about. And actually in our Good Food Buffalo Coalition and the work that we do to change institutional procurement, which I guess I'll just say a little bit about that right now. The other hat that I wear with Mass Ave Project, leading the Good Food Buffalo Coalition, we talk a lot about just process. And as you know, Molly, there's a movement around the country to push public institutions, usually starting with school districts, to purchase food under that name that Chris lifted up, the Good Food Movement, right? And you know, this idea is that, at least in Buffalo, the talking point that we lift up is that, you know, our Buffalo Public Schools spends $13.5 million each year on food for children in the school communities, $13.5 million. Now, when we look at, I'll just say East Buffalo, and which is for all of you from Philly, East Buffalo is our predominantly Black community. And we talk about the need to build up our community, to have a stronger economy. And the premise of the Buffalo Food Equity Network, which is an initiative of Food for the Spirit, is that we are building a new food economy that is built by us, for us, by communities of color, for communities of color. The reason why that's important goes back to this idea. So, and this is where my work intersects, so it gets a little tricky to talk about these dual hats, right? Is that when we talk about that $13.5 million that the schools spend, we know that they're spending that money on our children, feeding our children. So of course we want our children to have the best, most healthy food. Everybody wants that, right? We want the food that we like to eat, that is, we say culturally relevant foods, you know, and foods that our children, we want them to have a hand in it and growing in it, all of that, right? But, you know, if the infrastructure is not there in the food system to support this new food economy, this $13.5 million being directed to East Buffalo, to businesses in East Buffalo, to farmers, Black farmers, you know, then we can't be successful in our good food purchasing program, really making racial equity, making a difference regarding racial equity. And I'm using all these buzzwords that we use in the national movement. So the other piece is the necessity for us, for the Black community, to come together and figure out what we need in order to change our situation. And across the board, this idea of healing, that is a critical part of the process. Like, so just process for me, including community and leadership, defining what our healing process looks like, our healing process, not only personally, but for our economies, you know. And I lean heavily on my friends, movement generation friends from the Bay Area. Shout out to Mateo Noob and Quentin Sankofa, et cetera. You know, and they talk about this, I just lost my train of thought as I was lifting up my friends. I got so excited thinking about them. But yeah, so just this idea of just process and the need to, you know, to include our people from the get-go for this healing. So, and this healing, yeah, the healing that needs to happen for ourselves personally. And this is the kind of stuff that I know you talk about, Brother Chris, that, you know, the healing that we need to do personally with land, but also the healing that we need to do to build up our economies and get the infrastructure going so that we can actually be the businesses that are relied on to feed our children. And, you know, this middleman of the public institution I've struggled with, but I get it. You know, there's $13.5 million of taxpayers' money that is being poured into our schools. Who is getting that money? So if we can't employ just process, and that just process needing to be grounded in community and community participation, and not just participation, but leadership, right? So that's what just process is about in my mind. Brother Chris, did you get your phone set up?
You're set up. I think if you press *6 on your phone, it will unmute you. Or we can try to mute you from here.
*6 on your phone.
There it is. You're on.
Oh, okay. How's that? Okay.
Perfect.
Great. So I should just speak through the phone, right? Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So much of what you said, no, I mean, I absolutely resonate with is really real. And I think, one thing that I would just hook on, grab onto what you were saying, is lifting up that Black people need to not just be participants, but also in leadership. What that's going to take is, for me, what we've noticed are a couple of things. First, as I said in the beginning, is we need to be informed. Food sovereignty, for any people, first assumes that people have the information that they need. They have the intellectual resources and access to social capital, which we do have plenty of in our community, to do that. So that's the first thing, is that we need to know what the issues are, and then how we actually step in and do that. But then that's from the inside, and that's a whole encyclopedic, I think a world in and of itself of what all that means, and what is the work before us, and how are we getting it done right now. But then on the outside, in terms of the participation of white people, it's going to take, I would say, first, of course, people who are working with us, who are white. And I take for as a good example, my co-worker and co-director, Ty Holmberg. It's been a process. That's not an easy process, shifting, because what we found is that when we came from UP, and I was trying to say earlier, they had this wonderful idea, we'll start a farm in Southwest Philly, and we'll just sort of didn't ask anybody, didn't really make connections beyond institutional connections with nonprofits. Again, that's the way that white institutional thinking, I think, goes. Oh, well, let me go, where are the leaders? Let me go find the businesses or the institutions or the nonprofits, the academics. There's a sort of a set line of people who are identified as the leaders and as gatekeepers in the community, and they may have actually no clout or very little clout or very different clout with the people, and so that was, again, we were using that nonprofit model, but again, in the absence of a story, this young man, who was younger than me, as I was saying, we sort of set up the American way so that he's the boss, even when I had the agricultural experience and knowledge, right? And what it meant was his constant frustration and headbutting, because he didn't want to be in that role, because he's younger, he's is conscious, I think of the weight of whiteness in any situation. I think with people of color, particularly in a work situation like that, and on the land where there's so much feeling, bound up in it, especially for Black Americans, And of course, I didn't want to keep perpetuating that sort of situation. I think so. What it has taken has been years of working out what does it mean to be working multiculturally for Black interests, and what that has meant, because that's where we are at, because our neighborhood is 98% African descended, and so one big thing that it means is that white folks have to step back a lot from the power position and not just that, not just remove oneself physically, right? I don't just mean just not being available or just coming, because we also have seen models too in this city also that I think, for me, I personally feel very destructive, in which white people can be involved, but only for their resources or only for, whatever that is. I think that people of goodwill and good faith who have been long-term supporters and allies in Black communities do have a role and do have a place. It's not what is usually assumed. It is assumed to be, and I think a big part of it is them stepping back from the assumptions about leadership, the assumptions about process, like my sister said. Our meetings, like when Black people get to meet together and it's just all Black people, we don't always meet the way we would
in when there's white people involved or there's white spaces. Different assumptions about time. White people put a priority on linear time that is out of this world to me, you know, and I think that it's because I've seen it, and I've seen it cause pain, you know, to be late. And as an African descended person, I'm just like, okay. Yeah, I'm generalizing, I'm speaking, you know, but I'm not just speaking for myself. I don't think in a lot of, you know, ways. So, you know, I think so stepping back from many assumptions about what process looks like, what good process looks like, what leadership looks like, who is a leadership, what communication, what positive and what productive communication looks like, you know. So understanding, for instance, you come in that we need to assume that, you know, I think with white people, you know, coming in, that if there's a meeting or something, there's maybe a particular order. We might ask an elder to speak first because that's our custom. We will start probably, at least where I'm from, we'll start with a prayer or with some word of encouragement. You know, that's going to be, and that might take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, you know. Again, we meetings end, you know, when they're finished. You know, I think a lot of times happen. So just one powerful example, and one that I know that we had to do the work, and praise be to God, you know, and our ancestors, we have been able, I think, largely to move in a powerful way in that. But stepping back from those assumptions, and then also too using the connection and the resources they have in order to give away. It's about, for us, it's about people moving, sort of giving away the power that they have, particularly when it's power that comes from a corrupt system, giving away in wise ways, using your mind, being creative about it. I also want to shout out John Brown, who for some reason is still a controversial figure in this country, we heard, you know. It's controversial, but George Washington isn't. So, you know, I mean, I want to think again, I want to do that to Baba George Brown, who I do this amongst my ancestors. We got to get a picture of him and put him up here. But there's a new series about him on Showtime. Y'all check it out.
You gotta tell us his story.
Huh?
You got to tell us his story a little, right?
Well, okay, sorry. I assume everybody know about him. Okay, well, John Brown was a preacher. I'm going to tell you how he would describe himself. Again, pardon me, Reverend John Brown. Okay, as we say, Reverend Dr. King, not Dr. King or not MLK, right? Because if you ask these people what they were, they would have told you I'm a man of the gospel. So I want to start there. Reverend John Brown was an itinerant preacher, born, surprisingly, shockingly, in Connecticut, but who did most of his work and probably lived large part of his life in the South. He was called to liberatory work for and with African enslaved people during the mid and late 1800s. This is a badass brother who had the eyes of a madman and sort of this demeanor. But as a child, he saw a white man viciously beat and I think maybe kill a black child for making an error or mistake or something in front of him. And it shocked him and traumatized him so much he never recovered from it. He had very non-traditional and controversial techniques. He saw from his spiritual, he was a Christian, and I identify a lot with him as that too, as a Christian. In his Christianity, he was doing liberation theology before there was liberation theology, right? Before it had been named, right? And his take was that he read the Bible from cover to cover, and he could not understand how there could be justification for the enslavement of other human beings. And furthermore, he saw it as one of the gravest sins and the most important thing to deal with. He saw it as a spiritual and a social disease and a cancer that needed to be wiped out immediately. And so he took some tactics, including killing a lot of people, and he killed a lot of white people. So not endorsing killing anybody. But again, these were the times, because if you ask him, and this is why he was controversial, this is why he's still a controversial figure in this. He's a controversial figure because he killed white people. Let's be real clear about that. That's why he remains controversial. That's why Thomas Jefferson is not controversial. That's why George Washington is not controversial. And by God, Andrew Jackson is not even considered controversial. And if you say he is, then tell me why he's on the money. So I think just looking at that, for him, if you'd asked him, well, why do you have to kill people? Why do you have to set things on fire? Why do you have to do this? And the brother was bad, I'm going to tell you. He put his money where his mouth was. He gave up two sons, at least two sons, and maybe one of his daughters, I think, to revolution, fighting against slavery in the South. And he did this, led by a gospel conviction that people must be free, or we must do everything, to set it up. So he basically set the Civil War up to happen by his botched attempt of a raid at Harper's Ferry in Virginia, where there was a Confederate armory, right? And so he also had planned, apparently, with Mama Harriet Tubman and some other people, and tried to wrap Fred Douglass into it. There we go.
Him?
That's Papa.
That's him?
Okay.
All right.
That's him. That is the man.
All right.
H.J. Homo. And so he tried to link Fred Douglass into it. That didn't take. Fred has his own thing doing. He was on speaking to her. They essentially had organized so that hundreds of enslaved Africans would revolt all at the same time. That was his plan. And he had all these connections. Now, again, this man, white man, used his resources as a white man. He could go into any room and say what he wanted. Even when he was a wanted man with a price on his head, he continued to work probably for another decade after the FBI, or not FBI, but the government had put a price on his head. North and South wanted it, and particularly the South, of course. So that's John Brown, and that's a model when I talk about in terms of using resources. When he did speaking tours, he collected the money and he used that money to support liberation work with Black people and give it to Black people and support other Black people who were going, and then literally by force liberated African slaves himself, and with the help of others. So I think, that there are models that have been suppressed for what does it mean to use, and that for me is an example of, and we would say in my language, Christian language, and language that I believe John Brown would have been comfortable with as well, of giving powers away, becoming humble. And then what that meant, humble from that root, homos, which means earth, getting back to the earth, getting level with every other human being, because that's essentially the root of why white supremacy can thrive, is that white people are people and everybody else are other kind of people. And so I think what it's going to actually take, we didn't come here to talk about ending white supremacy, and God knows I always loathe to talk about ending white people's problems for them. I think that's incredible, huge work that they really need to get on. But I will say I think a big part of it is understanding that folks must all become human again. Human again is from the same root, humos, because we are made of earth and we'll return to earth, right? And so to humble oneself is to give away power, give away weight. And again, the same thing is called upon for us as African people in the Americas. I think about that with my brothers and sisters of the Latino community, particularly who are coming here in immigrant situation. Babies in cages. Our babies were in cages. Babies separated from their mama and daddies. Our babies were separated from their mamas and daddies. How could we not look and see that connection and see our ancestors in these people? And woe unto us if we look at them and don't see our ancestors. So again, we will all be called to give power away.
My goodness, there is so much that you just brought up that I would love to just spin off of, but I want to acknowledge, just ask Molly if we're okay to keep going, or where we are with time.
We are okay to keep going. We technically go until 6:45. So, but if this conversation carries a few extra minutes and you both have space for the conversation, then we can welcome it to go over a little bit, and attendees are welcome to hang with us as long as they are able. Grab your dinner, sit down with us. Were we in a different time in the world, we would be doing this in person. We'd be sharing a meal. Here we are. Becca, I want to put it back to you though.
Thanks, Molly. Yeah, I just trying to decide which direction to take that. So the thing that is most present for me in this moment is this idea of relationships. And I have folks on this call who are from our Buffalo Food Equity Network, which I said before is Black and Brown space, and so what we call an affinity group. And then we also have folks here from my more geographically, my geographic community who are my family as well, from this Finger Lakes region where I'm based now. So for those of you on the call who don't know me, I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, and I've got some Buffalo folks on the call. Shout out to Capucine and Channing and my mother, Karen. And then also I've got some Finger Lakes friends on the call. So Petra and Danielle and Kim Torpy and others. And the reason why I feel like this is, and see Annika, reason why this is important to acknowledge is that in the birthing of kind of a new organization and one that is committed to racial healing, this question of what is the role of white folks when we're talking about racial healing is, you can't not address it. And I would just say, for those of you who are looking at me, I lifted up my my African-American great-grandfather, James Henry Williams, but I'll acknowledge that my beautiful and, heartful and passionate and justice-oriented mother, Karen Powell, who's of German-Swedish ancestry, is on the line with us. And I have so much to be grateful to for her for instilling in me a sense of justice and what is right. And so personally for me, as we talk about this healing work, a lot of it is, that there's this duality that I've experienced my entire life, or at least a perceived duality, which I'm only now trying to wrap my head around how that's incorrect. And the only reason that duality exists is because of our country's and the world's racialized history and the lies that we believe regarding white people and Black people, and that there's differences that come with the color of our skin. And so what makes it a little complicated, and something that I think is important to lift up, is just that wearing the skin that I do with the complexion that I have, and speaking of in the I guess dialect that I speak in, coming from the socioeconomic background that I come from. And if you get deeper into this work and learn about the intersectionalities, then you'll know what I'm talking about, that, I've been challenged regarding race. And what people need to understand about that is that it's our country and our country's laws and policies that say that this person here with her Black ancestry is a Black person in the books, in the slave books. I would have been a Black person, and my ancestors, the trauma they experienced that are in my genetic codes and my DNA, that I carry. So somebody can look at me and choose to not see my racialized reality, but I know it's there. And my hope is that other people who look like me will come to that. And now what I'm getting to also is this question of what is our role individually when we talk about racial healing? And you cannot ignore your ancestors, your people's past, what they bring to the world. You have to look at that in order to really do that racial healing. And then furthermore, bringing back to where kind of I started with this kind of question of what is the work of white people in this? And the work of all of us is to unpack this stuff and figure out what racial healing means for each of us individually, but then as for a collective. And I'm just so proud and grateful for my Finger Lakes community who are on this call, who are of European ancestry, and sometimes I will say to them, and call them white folks, but we can call them of European ancestry, and that we are working through this kind of concept of accountability relationships. And what does it mean? Petra's on the line. She has something that she says, building relationships at this, it's not her, she didn't say it. Sorry, Petra. She would tell you, and maybe she'll put that in the chat, who actually said it, but she lifted it up nonetheless. Building relationships at the speed of trust. And across multicultural lines with Black communities and white communities, I mean, that is just, that work is so, there's a necessity for a certain level of care, and just a really heightened level of consciousness and attention that is necessary to really do that. So our Finger Lakes Accountability Network, as I refer to that group, who's, some of them are on the call tonight, you know, we've been just meeting for a long time just to build those relationships, like what you were talking about, Chris. And it actually hasn't even been that long. We've only been meeting since July. So I hear what you're saying with your, you know, Ty, your co-director. I mean, how long has it been? So thank you, Reverend Jennifer Bailey. Thank you, Petra. Change happens at the speed of trust. Trust happens at the speed of relationships. Thank you for that. But yeah, so this kind of thing about like this accountability and how do we have relationships that are built around trust.
Yeah. I think the one thing that brings to mind for me too, Sister Rebekah, is again, I have to go back constantly to what are the issues of Black people and Black communities. I think that trust, right, building those interracial, lassos of trust are so absolutely important, particularly when white people are working with Black people. I think that, but I think, again, I have to look at, you know, and I've been curious if there will be responses that will come, particularly from Black and brown folks who are listening right now. You know, but I think that there is real work as well that we as a community still have to do. When as a people our trust has been broken or misplaced so often, so many times over so many centuries, then it begins to wear on the community, I think, in a way, that our notions of trust. So the speed of trust, all of it, you know, I mean, obviously we're not just talking about interracial, but I would say intraracial, within intracultural, you know, because also too, African descended people, you know, are all kind of oftentimes lumped together. With what I've seen since I've been living in the North, people are here from different cultures. Now, white people folks from outside the culture may look, oh, it's a neighborhood of Black folks. No, we know that whole block is Jamaican. Mm-hmm. We know that all them fellas over there, they Muslim, all of them. We know right there, they're over there, what we would call the Mississippi holiness. They're holiness. They're Pentecostal. You know, we have all of these different cultures. We have people whose ancestors came from the Deep South who still hold much of those cultural traits, still eat the food. Even it's places you can go to in North Philly, they say, where almost whole villages relocated from South Carolina, you know, and are living there. You can hear it in their speech. People talk differently here, not just because they're from different parts of town. You know, I said, so I think it has to be really just gaining a deeper sense of trust. And, you know, when people are put in the melting pot, just as European immigrants had to do in this city, in Philadelphia, which is a city where the segregation started. I love to remind people because it's so important, you know, especially for us to learn. Segregation in this city started with Europeans. It was absolutely imperative that the Irish not live too close to English-descended people, you know, and that the Italians live way over here where they lived. And to this day, you can still see in lots of parts of Philly, you know, strong European ethnic communities. And we drive through and think, oh, isn't that nice? It's a nice Polish neighborhood over here. No, they lived there because they had to, you know. You know, these people live over here. So I think that's vitally important to talk about. So again, just following that model in our city, there's so much in terms of what trust looks like. And that for me feels like the work for Black led organizations. I want to throw out a name here, a couple of names that I think are helping to build trust and rebuild trust and helping to lift up that notion. And my leading with love, Reverend Heber Brown of the Black Church Food Security Network. Some of you may know him, right? The brother's doing awesome things. I don't have Instagram, my partner does, and so he shares with me sometimes. Look at some of his little 2 or 3 minute sermons that he's been doing on food sovereignty. If anybody's, I mean, absolutely out of this world. So, I mean, this brother's doing it. Other names that they come to me, people, who are making this work happen in real concrete ways, who are doing that on the ground community work. And it's slow because it's trust. You said the speed of trust, that can be slow. 10 years is how long we've been at it at our farm. We're still learning things about each other, But the rewards and the fruits are this, that when you do have a community that has begun to set up notions of trust, where elders are now working with young people instead of being afraid of them, and because we have our youth programs and we pair our young people up with elders for storytelling and other activities, when you have that sort of trust, when you have people at a market who come and stand in the market together, and they're learning about their traditional food sometimes for the first time, and they're doing it together. And then you got Sister Chef LaQuanda Dobson, who's over there on the ones and twos on the skillets, got people eating their traditional food and showing how to make it, and they're learning and they're growing, and they're building that again, and they're meeting. When we have that sort of thing happen, and then for us, I think from a interracial standpoint, then it makes it easier then for when we do have, and we're very selective, and I think too with the folks who are white who are coming in. I'll just be straight up about that, and I think that what I mean by that is that there's a lot of emotional work that has to be done, I think, for white people working in Black and brown communities, in order for them to be participants in decision-making roles. I want to just say that. And when they're making decisions with Black people, that's so they I feel like it because it's like asking a fish to tell you what water is. We swim in white supremacy, Black people and white people. We all do. We're trained for it. No matter how self-confident, it's always a default. It's always the default, And so, again, I mean, that's the reason why we got the one drop rule, like my sister was saying. When one gets to be, all of one is European. You may very well even be more European, Sister Rebekah, by blood than not, since Black people also have European blood in them, right? But again, you are Black in this country, right? Barack Obama is Black in this country, even though he was not raised with any Black people, and was raised, by his white mom. So again, I think that's what it means to swim in it. So it's very difficult. So for us, we're very selective, and there's people that we know who have been working with the community, and that's different, folks. And I mean, I think that there are different roles. We prioritize Black and brown volunteers. Even everyone is welcome to work with us in the volunteers. We certainly would take all the help. But when I say we prioritize, we do make a special effort to go out and look for Black and brown folks to do this work, because the work is largely for them in terms of getting the experiences back in their body to do this healing work. So yeah, I mean, there's so much. There's so much there.
There's so much.
I want to shut up. Yeah.
No, there's so much, and I'm grateful to both of you because you brought up things in what your words and in your demonstration by speaking of things that we talked about and things that I know you hold up in your work. One of them is storytelling, the power of stories, and the importance of hearing the stories of elders, the importance of understanding the stories of the folks that you're working with, because that's history. And that's part of building trust. That's part of building relationships, but it's part of also acknowledging where we're coming from and where we need to go. And then also, Chris, you just brought up this idea of land as healing. I love the phrase that I heard you say, land was seen as a crime. And I know that we are over time and we should wrap soon, but I wanted to know, there are these they're intangible, but they're very real, right? You can write a story down. Land is something that exists. Land is something that was stolen. Land is something that is needed. And so there are the tangibles and the intangibles, and we've talked about both, but I want to know from each of you, and maybe in summary or in thinking about how you want to send us all forward in this conversation. The things that will ensure that we thrive and that Black leadership can thrive in this food work that we all share together right now, or generally for ourselves as a people.
Molly, let me ask, just because I know that Chris and I can riff off each other for a little bit, would it be okay to allow us and the guests on the line to take about a 5-minute bio break and then return to stay on for another 15?
I'm going to pause and ask my Zoom masters, Susanna Erminska, if that is possible. I think that it is. Not hearing her say no. Yes, we can do that. Yeah, I got a text that says yes. So I have 6:50 on my phone. Shall we reconvene at 6:55? And participants, you're welcome to come back with your questions for the panelists.
Sure.
Okay, we'll see you in 5 minutes. Hi, everyone. We'll be starting up again in just a second when Chris is back on the line. We good? All right. I think
I'm gonna have to call back in. Okay.
you're okay right now.
Am I? Okay. All right.
We'll find out if you're not.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Okay. I think where I stopped off was reflecting on these tangible things that have come up, land, stories, and then some of the other pieces that we've talked about this evening, and elements of what will facilitate Black leaders to thrive in this food work, but in the broader work too. That's a pretty broad question, but after having a minute to think, if either of you want to take that or take it in a different direction, I welcome it.
Yeah. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I don't want to get too academic with this, but so I won't. But a colleague of mine who is an academic wrote me into co-authoring a paper with her recently, and she had wanted to do something about youth leadership, because that's how I started in this food work. I was the youth education director at Mass Ave for 5-6 years before I transitioned more fully into community organizing and policy work. You know, I was doing community organizing policy work just with young people prior, but I was often seen as the youth lady, the woman who came with youth in tandem and was always advocating that youth need to have a seat at the table, and you know, and that just process stuff that I talked about earlier, all of that through the lens of young people need to be at the table, and you know, it was predominantly youth of color, as that was the project. But when this colleague said to me, you know, she wanted to co-author a paper and she suggested youth, I said, you know, I really want to look at reparations, and I really want to look at some of the experiences that I have had the honor of participating in the last few years that speak to this question of reparations and the correlation between reparations and food work. And you cannot talk about a correlation of reparations and food work without talking land. But really, I'm trying to find just really quickly the lead in the paper, working on the land for many Black folks, is an activity inextricably linked with ancestral experiences and traditions ranging from the traumatic to the celebratory. But, you know, really, I mean, when we're talking about food and growing our own food and agriculture, having an experience with the land, on the land, in relationship with the land is integral. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I moved out to rural central New York, is to connect with more people who have relationship with land and the woods and nature. Ultimately, I'm really seeking to connect with Black farmers out here.
Rebekah, I think you're freezing up a little bit.
Froze. No. Okay.
Becca, if you want to sign out and sign back in,
Yeah, maybe
that's
that.
okay.
Okay, yeah. I think that, you know, I mean, I can pick that up. It is absolutely essential. I mean, again, we talk a lot about, you mentioned the phrase that I said, which I'm sure I'm not the first person to say it, but that land for Africans in the Americas is a scene of the crime, and it also was sort of the instrument of punishment, the instrument of oppression, I think, too. And so that's very real. When we talk about this trust, and what my sister was saying earlier, Sister Rebekah was saying earlier about relationships moving at the speed of trust. Again, using the deeply African, you know, I think, understanding of the interrelatedness of all things, that also speaks to our relationship with the land. Great damage has been done, you know, I think, over, and not just talking about slavery. We're talking about, you know, I think that if you recently, another name, Isabel Wilkerson, who wrote The Warmth of Other Suns, and recently just came out with a new book, Caste, talks a lot about this, that how even redlining, you know, when we talk about ownership of home ownership implies land ownership in this country. So home ownership / land ownership being sort of the summit of the American idea, the American dream, you know, the biggest part of it was something that was, you know, historically denied to Black people. My brothers and sisters who are white, who had ancestors who fought in the First and the Second World War, but when they came back and got GI bills and were able to start a life, moving some of them out of immigrant status and into white status, to be very, very clear, particularly for people who are Jewish or Italian. That was particularly true, you know. But they were able to get homes, and they were able to move into spaces and able to move into places and not have to pay a down payment. This is key. This is how wealth is passed on, right? So I won't repeat what the sister was saying, but I think that we have to think about how they didn't, like, not having worked for free to build up the entire economy of the country. And the only story, or the largest story, that was passed on, or that filters on to Black people who live in cities, especially nowadays, about the land, is this idea that land is an instrument of oppression, and that land is the scene of the crime. Land, and especially open fields or woods and all of that, were the places where bad things happen to us. And we don't want to remember that. And so we will draw farther and deeper into cities. And of course, folks are forced economically, Black and white, but of course, mostly Black people, right? In this context, to leave rural situations when they did live there and move into the city because of, you know, just because of economic deprivation, right? And then so again, this notion is reinforced of a distancing of oneself from the concept of what land is. And when folks move into the cities, of course, they move into the cities and they were redlined, so they couldn't move into homes. And so I think just all together, I think that is a tremendously important part of what has to happen is to first reacquaint African people with the land, who came with centuries of agricultural and deeply, you know, relational experience with the land. You know, my parents and my grandparents, to a certain extent, and even more their parents, I'm sure her parents, you know, kept these traditions around traditional healing, which I thank God that I have asked for. And so I'm able now to do that myself, you know. But these were all the things that we did. So the only story about land is not oppression, is not the great crime that was done to us, you know, that seems so difficult for everybody to recover from. But there were also healing things that happened on the land, as it was before we came here, you know, to America. So I think that that's part of the story that has to be told. So it's going to take a reacquaintance first, and that's a very important process that can't be bungled. Every time I work with Black kids, and I don't know if you have this experience, Sister Rebekah, way up north in New York State, but every time I begin to work with a new group of young Black people, invariably, inevitably, the first day when we take them out to the field and do the tour and show them everything, they will begin to express their discomfort with even being on land. When you start bringing out hoes and shovels and you show them rows of crops, that has a different oftentimes, and that's not everybody, right? Folks have a different experience. Different folks, individuals have different. I'm saying on the mean, in general, we have to spend days, if not a couple of weeks, in orientation, which we prepare for already. We already have a specific orientations rolled out for the reacquaintancing of African descended children and people to the land, because we expect it. And as a Southerner, for me, it's a double surprise, because I did have the blessing of not having my only experience with land be one that was absolutely negative. You know, my ancestral connection with it. So we have to clear all of that. We have to do a lot of spiritual cleaning, and it starts with introducing them to the land, right? Because the kids will start to sing spirituals or their version of spirituals. The kids will begin to speak in what they think is old Black dialect from the South, right? This does not, by the way, is not the same for all kids from all people. I'm saying kids, but it's also, you know, in general, those who from the African diaspora. Because when I get students who are from Jamaica, when we get students who are from Trinidad and Tobago and from the islands, when we get Afro-Latino students from Santo Domingo, from Puerto Rico, from all of them, from Ecuador, these places, and we've had them before, the experience is totally different. Our Liberian students, and everybody knows that Philadelphia is blessed to be one of the centers of Liberian population in the United States. It's ironic, right? Because I think so many Africans left from Philadelphia to go to Liberia, right? That's 2 centuries ago, in order to found that then colony in Africa. And so now there are so many who have returned here, and we have a lot of students who are in co-workers and community people who are from that community. Again, they're understanding, if they're excited about that. We want to pass that on to people. So I think setting up environments and situations where you can reacquaint them, but you can reacquaint them with people who have had good experiences. That's vital, you know, in order to show. And then we show them the connections to their own life. So I think, yeah, that work has to be done, and that's slow work, but that is essential work before we can start talking. We can do more than one thing at a time, but we got to focus on that, y'all. I really want to hear, because I think what I hear a lot in the farming community is, yeah, we'll just teach everybody to grow a garden. We'll just set up a farmer's market in the neighborhood. These Black folks don't know nothing about your farmer's market and ain't coming. They don't know, who are you? Who are you? Who are your connection? Who is your mama? Who is your daddy? Where are your people from? Do you live around here? You know, why should I trust your food? Because again, that disconnection from land, particularly in urban settings, means that folks believe the very ground they walk on is also poisonous. They believe it, all of it. I've watched people say, intelligent people, otherwise would go right in and go to a grocery store and buy loads of produce from a grocery store off the fruit truck, having no idea what hands touched it and where it came from and all the processes and chemicals it encountered on its way from whatever country it came to eat, right? But will tell you, oh, I wouldn't eat that food from something that was grown right in the garden, right in front of you. That's the work that we need to do as African people. Why? Because it was grown in Philadelphia, dude. I'm like, well, ain't you from Philly? Well, yeah, but. So let's do that. And that's medicine that only Black folks can give. But to use the words of Sister Thea Bowman, may she rest in power, a righteous Black Catholic nun who's up for sainthood, y'all look her up right now, from Canton, Mississippi. She would say, when you got enough fully formed Black folks, right, then you can help usher people through that process, right? And so we got to replace those negative experiences. Now, anybody who survived trauma, then you know you need 1,000 positive experiences to even touch the one negative experience, you know. So yeah, I think that's where it's at. Y'all better stop me, because I could go on and on, because this is our bread and butter. I think, you know, the idea of reacquainting, because that healing is so, because we're not talking about this in the farming world. We're talking about production. We're talking about pounds of food grown. It don't matter if they don't eat it. Mm-hmm. And if it ain't familiar, they're not gonna eat it. And if they don't know how to cook it, they're not gonna eat it. That's what should be important. If they don't know that there is some connection within their own family line, if that family line has been broken down because I lost my mama to crack and I lost my daddy to gun violence, so I don't know, I know I got a grandma, I don't know where she come from, or this idea, or my grandma raised me. And when grandparents have to raise kids, which is so often the case in Black and Latino communities especially, because of all the things that happened to us within the past 40, 50 years, right? Disproportionate amount of this is also in rural white people too. But when grandma has to raise somebody, she can't actually do grandma work when she's doing mama work. There's something about that power of that grandma who can pass on the specific knowledge and repeat those same stories, right? If anybody get that warm space in your heart for grandma right now, if you had a good one, you know, but that passing on of that knowledge that only grandma and grandpa do, that they can do in some part because they have the liberty of sending you home at some point and then seeing you again, right? Again, that when she's working like a 25-year-old, she's not going to have time to pass on that deep knowledge or have the sentiment or the ability, you know, when she's trying to figure out what you're doing and she don't know nothing about these computers and all this stuff. So there's just so much, I think, you know, and then that's the healing. So we're ready to talk about healing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't want to belabor it too much. And I was taking that when I got cut off, it was a sign that I was going down a direction maybe I shouldn't have. I just love finding who you're talking about. So is that your sister Bowman there?
That's Sister Thea,
Yeah.
in Mississippi.
All
Yeah.
right.
Radical black nun. And yeah.
All right, say more. I'm sorry, I should have let you not cut you off.
No, there's no more. There's no more to say. Yeah. You know.
Yeah, I just the one thing that struck me, I was trying to lift up some of the experiences for people on the call who maybe aren't familiar with some of these places, but in 2018, I got to do a couple of things that were transformative and were kind of laid the foundation for this kind of thoughts around reparations, which I'm sorry I missed where the conversation went when I got cut off, but just that, you know, so 2018, the Heal Food Alliance School of Political Leadership, which does a lot of grounding and racial analysis and the connection between race issues and food systems work. And so they sent us to North Carolina to a place called Tierra Negra as part of that School of Political Leadership. And you're nodding like wonderfully. So that was the first place that I kind of was introduced to this concept of when we do work on the land as Black folks, as Indigenous folks, you know, Tierra Negra, which is led by Black and Indigenous Afro-Latinx folks, you know, and they are very intentionally grounded around healing. So they don't call their farm a farm. You know, it's just in that title of a farm has the connotations that are not what that group is about. They think of it as a healing place. And they said there something that stuck with me, which is that we don't force each other to do this work. Like as Black folks and as Indigenous people working with the land and on the land, it very much has to be ritual and it has to be celebration. And that's part of the healing practice. And heard that again just last summer, 2019, I got to do the Soul Fire Farms BIPOC Farmers Immersion. And Soul Fire Farms, for those of you that aren't aware, is based in Troy, New York, so pretty close to me, about a 4 or 5 hour drive from where I am. And there are a farm that is committed to, an organization that is committed to ending racism in the food system. And I heard a very similar thing. So in my cohort, we were the last cohort in the summer of 2019. I made the cut because I know they're not doing any farmers immersions this summer because of COVID. But they train hundreds of BIPOC identifying folks each, you know, they have in the last few years. And they also said a similar thing in the 5-day program, which is that if you're not called to do this work, like in a moment, if there's something that is coming up for you and you need to take care of it, you need to go do that. So we're not here to force folks to farm. We're here for you to have your experience with this work and in relationship with this land and place. And that for me was just, you know, when you talk about working with youth, these are things that I was introduced to after I had worked with young people. And, there are a lot of these urban agriculture organizations that do hire young folks, and doing racial identity work was definitely part of something that we did at MAP. When I was a youth education director, we definitely spent time with our young people and had them kind of think about where they, how they identified, and not just racially, but also regarding their sexuality and regarding their socioeconomic background and all of those kind of things. And then we had a strong group of, I keep wanting to say Laotian, but that's not right. Burmese young folks from they would say Myanmar. We had a number of Somali and Kenyan young folks. So Buffalo, because of how it's situated with the border to Canada, is a very international place in terms of new Americans establishing a home there. So lots of the young folks came to us. So I know what you're talking about in terms of the diversity of relationships to land and farming that the young folks from those other countries brought. But I would love the opportunity, and just looking at my peers from Buffalo on the call and knowing, that Capucine works with young people. And I think of my sister, Felicia Brown, who she didn't train. She was a kindergarten teacher back in Buffalo, and she did food justice work with kindergartners, and, thinking about how, we can approach this work through that lens of healing and just intentionality around giving them opportunities to be on the land.
It's vitally important. I think that when we talk about leadership, Black and brown folks' leadership in this work, that has to be prioritized. That piece on doing that healing, because we don't know all the damage that's been done, but we do have some idea of what health could look like, and I think that and again, I'm saying health. Everybody who knows me knows I love words and etymologies, right? Health comes from, the same root in Old English as whole, being whole, again. And so we know, well, what does being made whole again look like, And I think it's reality, for us. And I think of that in particular because so many of our young people feel that there are gaps in their story that I've heard from some of them over the years, over the 10 decades of working with different young people, that there are gaps in their stories for lots of reasons, right? So how do we fill in the hole? And I love it what you said too, Sister Rebekah, about doing ritual. I lift that up, that ritual actions in the field, we consider every agricultural act a ritual. We also have ways that we ritually enter our space too. We greet the field, we say a prayer or a blessing or whatever before we go in, kiss the ground, whatever is our individual practice, but we have some way of doing that. But also just every single action, from cleaning a hoe to harvesting peas, to see these as ritual embodiments, of the people that we come from, and allow that to sort of, feel the story. And that's where, I think so again, yeah, the healing part is crucial, and to the extent that we have people who are helping us too from whatever parts of the community. I think that part has to be taken seriously. That's not an add-on. That's not if we get to it, that's not an extra. It's not, what is this word I've heard since I've gotten up north? Woo woo.
Yeah.
I like what a baby say, yeah. So, it's not any of that. It's like actually, essential, because when we start bringing things come out of us, when we get together and we're doing these things, they help to drive us forward. And I think it's one of the reasons that the work that we've done, in that we're doing here is drawing such interest, because I don't think, and we talked about this too, Sister Rebekah, you referenced earlier in our conversation, I want to throw it out there again, Sister Bell Hook's book, Salvation, Black People in Love, right? And that this is, that those are aspects that when we're talking about our political uplift, our social progress, we don't make space for those things that are vitally important. Because what happens is that if you get to this freedom
or this, whatever this place is, this Zion that we are expecting to move towards, you know, in terms of our race relations, in terms of our socioeconomic sort of situation or whatever, when we make it to the doorstep of these places and we don't have all the parts of us, we haven't started that work of pulling together the parts of us that need to be healed and lifting them up and talking about it, you know, then we don't come in to wholeness full. You know, we don't come in fully present, I think. And I'm just really thinking about the ways in which we have to do those things and let Black people lead that in Black situations.
I'm just going to try to find a link to that one, just because that book is just such an important book.
Oh yeah.
I think this is an article about it back in 2001, but that was definitely a life changer.
That long ago.
Yeah, Black People in Love. So if folks don't know Bell Hooks, know her.
Please know her. Please know her.
And as you both have been speaking, Suzanne and I have been trying to add links to everything that you're referring to. And so folks know, there's going to be a couple of ways to engage with this conversation, other conversations we've had in this series. In part, we are collecting all of the references and resources that you all are mentioning so that we can kind of have a resource library for people who want to think about how to change their perspective or broaden their perspective on what it means to be part of this food work. Hell yes, great. Bell hooks. And so, you know, I want to acknowledge that we've had you here. We've had the pleasure of having you here for far longer than I've asked you. And thank you for your time because you're generous. We're going to have an audio and a visual recording of this afterwards as well. We'll share that with folks. And to our speakers, is there anything briefly that you'd like to leave us with before we all say, see you soon? Because this is not the end, this is just a pause in the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so thankful to have had the opportunity to be here tonight. It just feels like such a special, warm moment. And, you know, earlier we were, you know, talking about whether because of the young man in Philly who was murdered, whether or not we would continue this conversation. I think I'm so glad that we did. I think speaking our truths in this food work is relevant and it's critical, and everybody who was on the line with us tonight needed it for whatever reason. And yeah, I'm just so grateful that you invited me, Molly and Susanna, and that you connected us with Chris. Susanna, thank you for that. And Brother Chris, just as I've said to you in private and also to both of these women, just what an impact that you've made on my work. So it just meant so much to be able to connect with you in this way tonight. Thank you.
Again, thank you so much. It was hard to think about how to, and I do still honestly feel a little in knots just about the timing, Brother Walter's murder, but I do feel really blessed to have been a part of this with you, especially Sister Rebekah, because I feel that this feels like a particular blessing. I don't know how to articulate it, but it feels like we were supposed to be doing something together. So I'm glad that we have been able to, and I look forward to in the future. And of course, too, for Susanna's constant sort of support and always looking out and putting the people on whenever there's something good. We go back a long way, and I just want to really, really be grateful for the space, Sue, that you open up, especially for Black and Brown folks, healing conversations and hosting and bringing that to bear. So I want to lift that up and thank you for that. And thank you, Molly, too, for leading this also so graciously. You should have been a moderator for one of those ridiculous debates. My gosh. We're gonna bring that into.
I
Right.
am so blessed that this is my space and my work and not that, and that we're spending this time together. So thank you. Thanks to everyone who attended and who
Thank you,
hung out
everyone.
with us. Voting day is a week from today. I hope that you'll exercise your right, and I appreciate all of you for being here. Thank you, Susanna. Feel better. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Becca. Good night, all.
Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone here. Take care.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, all.